Good morning. Today in your assignment, you're going to look at slide 9, and you're going to have to analyze these two pictures. The picture on the right is done by Paula Revere, a noted artist in Boston, and the picture on the left is another picture that has been made and portrayed the same event. Your job in this slide will be to analyze both and tell me the differences that you see and what you see happening between the two. But before we go any further, let me give you a little bit of background of what's happening. If the French and Indian War was the war that made America, this picture, the one on the right, of the Boston Massacre, is the picture that made America. So let's just talk a little bit about what had happened. After the French and Indian War, many British soldiers were left behind. They were forced to find housing, places to live, obviously, and find their own food. The British government, out of money, decided not to pay them, and so they issued a thing called the Quartering Act. And the Quartering Act required colonists to put the British soldiers up in their house where they would find housing, and you would feed them and let them live there free of charge. So the British soldiers are going to be a target. There you can see the red coats, and the red coats are they get nicknamed the lobster backs. And as they walk through town, they were often assaulted and given grief and given a hard time because the colonists were just tired of having the British there. And all these events are going to take place in the month of March. And the year is going to be really important to us. So let's just look what happened, because it's 1770 and the revolution doesn't start until 1776. So what happens is the showdown here is going to come early in March, as I said, after a few soldiers who were had taken jobs. Many of the colonists had gone on strike because they weren't getting paid enough. And these British soldiers stepped in and took their jobs, which is going to add to the anger, which is going to lead to a riot in which eventually one civilian is going to be killed. Now, that was on March 5th. And on March 7th, what you see is the Boston Massacre occurs. And what happens here, and there's, by the way, I will tell you that there are several stories, and we'll put them all together in this narrative for you. But the colonists began pelting the soldiers with snowballs. So the Boston Massacre really started out as a snowball fight. And the main guard was guarding, and he was taking a wicked beating of snowballs. And eventually about 20 other British soldiers came out to help protect. So they became the main guard, and with them they came out with their bayonets fixed, as you can see in the picture, and they confronted the yelling mob. One soldier who had been main soldier who had been out there and getting pelted with snowballs from the beginning lost his patience. He was turned and he fired into the crowd, and the rest of the soldiers fired as well. When it was all done, as you'll see in the slide presentation this morning, 5 people are going to be killed, and one of those will be a gentleman by the name of Crispus Attucks, and he will be one of the first killed in the American Revolution. Crispus Attucks will be one half black and one half Native American. So it's ironic to me that the American Revolution started with the death of a minority. Well, that's one side of the story. The other side of the story that happens, and we can find this to be equally as true, at the same time that all of this is going down, a house in Boston also had a fire. And so people began running to put out the fire, and somebody yelled, "Fire." And as you know, the word fire to a soldier means just what that means, to fire. So you had several things coming together at the same time. A soldier is getting pelted with snowballs in a snowball fight, turning in fire, and somebody else, actually having a fire, yelling fire. And when we get all done, we see, the result, which becomes known as the Boston Massacre. Now, one of the questions you probably need to ask yourself is simply this: is five persons being killed a massacre? And if it is, okay, that's fine. If you think that we need more people dying for it to be a massacre, that's fine also. But what's going to happen is these pictures are going to turn into propaganda. And it all depends on your perspective of how you see the pictures, and take a good look again as I ask you to analyze what you see happening. So that's a little bit of background for you. It'll help you understand your assignment and as you go through. So once again, have a good day, and as I always say to you, be good and do good.